It was a beautiful Dutch colonial home on Ocean Avenue, with a boathouse, a swimming pool, and a quiet view of the Amityville River from the outside. It looked like the perfect family home. But in November 1974, that peaceful house became the scene of a massacre that changed horror history forever. 6 members of the DeFeo family were found dead inside their beds, and the only surviving family member was the man who pulled the trigger. But even after the killer was caught, one question refused to die. How did an entire family sleep through the sound of a rifle being fired inside their own house? We'll come back to that detail later, because the murders were only the beginning. Just over a year later, another family moved into the same house. The Lutz family heard voices whispering from empty rooms. They felt eyes tracking them from the dark corners. They woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like the house itself was breathing around them. Some people called it a haunting. Others called it a hoax. But one thing is undeniable. Before the Amityville horror became a book, a movie, and a legend, it was a real house, a real crime scene, and a nightmare that America never forgot. The house stood in Amityville, a quiet village on Long Island, New York. It had a large front lawn, a boathouse near the water, and those famous upper windows that almost looked like eyes watching the street. The DeFeo family called it home. Ronald DeFeo Jr. lived there with his wife Louise and their children. To outsiders, they seemed successful. They had a big house, a family business, a life that looked comfortable from the outside. But behind closed doors, the family was far from peaceful. There were arguments, there was anger, there were rumors of violence inside the home. And at the center of that tension was the oldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch. Butch was troubled. He worked at the family auto business, but he was known for drinking, drug use, and violent behavior. His relationship with his father was especially explosive. The house that looked beautiful from the outside was slowly becoming a pressure cooker. And on one cold November night, that pressure finally exploded. In the early morning hours of November 13, 1974, while the DeFeo family slept, Butch picked up a rifle. Then he moved through the house, room by room, bed by bed. He shot his father, then his mother, then his brothers and sisters. By the end of the night, 6 people were dead. The strange thing was not only the murder itself, it was the silence around it. The rifle was loud. The house was occupied. The shots happened inside the same home, and yet the victims were found in their beds. There were no clear signs of a desperate fight, no signs that the family ran through the house trying to escape. No neighbors rushed outside after hearing gunfire. Only the family dog was said to have barked. That one detail became one of the most disturbing mysteries of the case. How could so many shots be fired inside a family home, and still, no one seemed to wake up in time? After the killings, Butch did not immediately confess. He washed himself, changed his clothes, and tried to act normal. Later, he told people he had come home and found his family dead. At first, he tried to blame someone else. He suggested it was a mafia hit. He claimed dangerous men were involved. But the story did not hold. The police questioned him. The evidence closed in, and eventually, Butch confessed. The beautiful house on Ocean Avenue was no longer just a home. It was a massacre site. A son had murdered his own family, and the address would soon become one of the most infamous places in American horror. Part 3. The trial. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was arrested and put on trial. His defense argued that he was not sane. There were claims that he heard voices, claims that something told him to kill, claims that his mind was broken. But prosecutors rejected that idea. Their argument was simple. Butch knew what he was doing. He understood his actions. He tried to hide the crime. He tried to blame someone else. And because of that, they said he was responsible. In 1975, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted for the murders of his family. He was sentenced to prison for the rest of his life. For most true crime stories, this would be the ending. The killer was caught. The trial was over. The case was closed. But Amityville was different, because after the court case ended, the house remained. The court case was closed. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. was locked away, and the house on Ocean Avenue stood empty, silent, dark, waiting. The blood had been cleaned. The furniture had been removed. The neighbors tried to move on, but some houses do not feel empty just because no one is living inside them. And a little over a year later, a new family saw a for sale sign they could not resist. George and Kathy Lutz were looking for a home. They wanted space. They wanted comfort. They wanted a fresh start for their family. Then they found the Ocean Avenue house. It was larger than anything they expected. 6 bedrooms, a pool, a boathouse, a peaceful view, and the price was surprisingly low. Of course, there was a reason. The realtor told them what had happened there. 6 people had been murdered inside the house just over a year earlier. Most families would have walked away immediately, but the Lutz family did not. They believed a house did not have memories. They believed the past belonged to the past, and they believed they could turn the place into a home again. So they bought it. They moved in with their children. They brought furniture, family photos, clothes, toys, and hope. But almost immediately, the atmosphere inside the house began to feel wrong. George started feeling cold all the time. Not normal winter cold. A deep cold that seemed to come from inside the walls. He became obsessed with keeping the fireplace burning. No matter how much wood he used, the house never felt warm. Then he began waking up every night at the same time, 3:15 a.m., the approximate time connected to the DeFeo murders. At first, it could have been stress, a new house, a dark history, a family trying to adjust. But soon, the Lutz family claimed the house began showing them something much worse. According to the Lutz family, the haunting did not happen all at once. It slowly built around them. Doors slammed by themselves. Cold spots appeared in rooms. Strange smells moved through the house and disappeared. Kathy reportedly felt unseen hands touching her. George's personality began to change. He became angry, tired, distant. The children felt watched, and the house itself seemed to grow heavier every day. The Lutz family heard voices whispering from empty rooms. They felt eyes tracking them from the dark corners. Sometimes, the rooms felt full even when no one was inside. Then came one of the most famous and disturbing parts of the Amityville legend. Their young daughter began talking about an imaginary friend. His name was Jody. At first, it sounded harmless. Children invent imaginary friends all the time. But Jody was not described like a normal imaginary friend. Jody was said to be pig-like, with glowing red eyes. And according to the story, he was not just in the child's imagination. George claimed he saw something outside the window, a shape in the darkness, a face, red eyes staring back at him. Then, when he ran outside, there was nothing there, only the cold night, and the feeling that whatever had been watching them had stepped back into the shadows. Now stop for a second and imagine this. You are a parent. Your child tells you she has a new imaginary friend. At first, you think it is harmless, normal, something children do. But then she tells you his name is Jody. She says he lives in the house. She says he has glowing red eyes. And then one night you look toward the window and realize your daughter's imaginary friend may not be imaginary at all. Imagine being a parent and realizing your child's imaginary friend has hooves. As the days passed, the claims became even stranger. The family said they found a hidden room in the basement, a small red room. It was not shown on the original plans. It was painted a dark, disturbing red. It was small enough to make anyone feel trapped. Their dog reportedly refused to go near it. To the Lutz family, that room felt different from the rest of the house. Darker, heavier, almost like the house had a secret heart. Then came the flies. A room filled with flies in the middle of winter. Green slime allegedly oozed from the walls. Doors were ripped from hinges. Furniture seemed to move. There were strange sounds in empty rooms. And outside in the snow, the family claimed they found hoof-like prints. It was as if the house was no longer hiding what it was. Every night felt worse than the last. George kept waking at 3:15 a.m. Kathy claimed she felt something grabbing her. The children became afraid, and the dream home slowly turned into a trap. But the Lutz family was not the only one connected to the haunting claims. They also brought in a priest, and according to the legend, what happened to him made the story even darker. The Lutz family reportedly asked a priest to bless the home. The idea was simple. If something evil was inside the house, maybe prayer could force it out. But according to the story, when the priest entered one of the rooms, he heard a voice. A voice that did not belong to George. A voice that did not belong to Kathy. A voice that came from inside the house. It told him to get out. After that visit, the priest reportedly became ill. He struggled with strange symptoms. He found it difficult to continue helping the family. For believers, this detail became important. Because if only the Lutz family had experienced the haunting, skeptics could say it was fear, stress, or imagination. But if an outsider experienced something too, then maybe the house really was disturbed. Maybe the murders had left something behind. Maybe the walls had absorbed the violence. Maybe evil did not leave when the bodies were removed. But skeptics saw it differently. They believed the story was growing bigger with every retelling. A murder house, a priest, a demonic voice, a red-eyed creature, a hidden room. To them, it sounded too perfect, too cinematic, too much like the horror movies people were already obsessed with. And this is where the Amityville story becomes complicated, because the murders were real, but the haunting depended entirely on who you believed. The Lutz family lasted only 28 days inside the house. On January 14, 1976, they left, not after months of planning, not after selling the home properly. According to their account, they fled. They left belongings behind. They did not return to live there again. Think about that. They had found what looked like a dream home. They had moved their family into it. They had ignored its violent past, and less than 1 month later, they were gone. For believers, this is one of the strongest arguments. Why would a family abandon their own home so suddenly unless something truly terrifying happened? But skeptics ask a different question. Why did the story later become so profitable? After leaving the house, the Lutz family told their story. Author Jay Anson turned it into the Amityville Horror. The book became a sensation. Then came the movie, then more movies, then documentaries, then interviews, then decades of arguments. The house became one of the most famous haunted locations in the world, but with fame came doubt. Some people believed the Lutz family had survived something evil. Others believed they had turned a real tragedy into a horror legend. And the more famous the story became, the harder it was to separate truth from performance. The Amityville haunting has always divided people. Believers say the Lutz family had no reason to stay silent if something happened to them. They say fear can be heard in their accounts. They say too many details are strange. The 3:15 a.m. waking, the red room, the flies, the voices, Jody, the priest, the feeling of being watched. To believers, the house was not just haunted, it was infected. A place where violence had opened a door. But skeptics point to another fact. Later owners of the house did not report the same type of haunting. The address was changed. The house was renovated. People continued living there. And many who studied the story argued that the haunting claims were exaggerated or invented. To them, Amityville was not proof of demons. It was proof of how powerful a scary story can become when it is attached to a real crime. And maybe that is why this case refuses to die. Because both sides have something to hold on to. The skeptics have the inconsistencies. The believers have the fear. And everyone has the murders. That is the part no one can erase. The DeFeo family really died in that house. 6 people were really found in their beds. A son really confessed. A jury really convicted him. That horror was not imagined. The only question is whether something remained afterward. After the Lutz family left, the house did not disappear. Other people eventually lived there. The address was changed to protect the owners from unwanted attention. The famous windows were altered. The house was renovated. But none of that erased the legend. Tourists still came. People still took pictures. Horror fans still whispered about the murders. And the house became more than a building. It became a symbol, a place where true crime and supernatural horror collided. For some, it is a murder house. For others, it is the most famous haunted house in America. For skeptics, it is a lesson in how tragedy can become entertainment. For believers, it is proof that evil can attach itself to a place. That is the terrifying idea at the center of Amityville. Can a house remember? Can walls hold fear? Can violence leave behind something invisible? Maybe not. Maybe a house is only wood, brick, glass, and stone. Maybe the only monsters inside Amityville were human. But if the Lutz family was telling the truth, then the house on Ocean Avenue was something far worse. Not just a crime scene, not just a haunted house, but a place that waited, a place that watched, a place that wanted the next family to feel what happened there. So what really happened in Amityville? The first part is certain. In November 1974, Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his family inside their home. That tragedy was real. The second part is where the mystery begins. George and Kathy Lutz moved into the same house. They stayed for 28 days. Then they left. They claimed the house had voices. They claimed something watched them. They claimed an evil presence wanted them out. Maybe they were telling the truth. Maybe fear and grief created a nightmare. Maybe they were telling the truth. Maybe fear and grief created a nightmare. Maybe the story was exaggerated. Maybe it was a hoax. Or maybe the truth sits somewhere in the middle. Because sometimes the scariest stories are not the ones that are completely proven. They are the stories where one part is undeniable, and the rest is impossible to explain. The Amityville house still stands, changed, private, quiet, but its story refuses to die. Because once a home becomes the scene of murder, and then becomes the center of a haunting, people will always wonder what is still hiding inside the walls. So the next time you see a beautiful house with a price that feels too good to be true, ask one question. What happened there before you arrived? Because some homes are not empty when the family leaves. Some homes keep their secrets. And some doors, once opened, should never be opened again.